My father chose his second wife over me, and I chose never to look back. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. Not a phone call, not a text, not even a relative sent as a messenger the way their people do when the news is too heavy for words typed on a screen. Just a white envelope with her name written in handwriting she did not recognize, slipped beneath the door of her apartment in Lagos, as though whoever brought it did not want to be seen, as though whoever brought it was afraid. Kelechi Obi stood in her kitchen in a borrowed silence, the kind that only exists at 5 in the morning when the city outside has not yet remembered to be loud. She held the envelope and did not open it for a long time. Something in the weight of it told her that the life she had spent 7 years carefully building, the apartment, the job, the deliberate distance, was about to be disturbed. She set it on the counter and made tea she did not drink. Then she opened it. Inside was a single folded page and a photograph. The photograph showed a woman she almost did not recognize, her mother, young and unlined, standing in front of a building Kelechi had never seen, holding something wrapped in cloth against her chest like it was alive. On the back of the photograph, in her mother's handwriting, "For Kelechi only. When the time comes, she will know." The folded page was a legal document, and what it said changed every single thing. You have to understand something about Nena Obi before you can understand what she left behind. She was not the kind of woman who announced herself. She did not walk into rooms loudly or laugh in a way that demanded attention. She was still water, and everyone knows that still water runs the deepest. Kelechi's earliest memory of her mother is not of laughter or games or bedtime stories. Though those things existed, her earliest memory of her mother sitting at the kitchen table very early in the morning, writing in a small brown notebook that she always kept locked, writing with the focused intensity of a woman who knew something the rest of the world did not. Kelechi never asked what was in that notebook. She was a child who understood, without being told, that some things were not meant to be asked about. Her father, Chukwemeka Obi, Emeka to everyone who knew him, was a different kind of person entirely. He was a man who needed to be seen. He ran a building material supply business in Onitsha, moderately successful, and carried himself like a man who was more successful than he actually was. He wore agbada to funerals, even when the deceased were distant acquaintances. He greeted people loudly in the market so that everyone would know he had arrived. He was not cruel exactly. He was something more complicated than cruel. He was a man who needed the world to reflect his own importance back to him. And when Nena became ill, when cancer stripped her slowly and quietly of her energy that she had always conserved so carefully, Emeka grew restless in the way that vain men grow restless when life stops performing for them. Kelechi was 14 years old when her mother was first diagnosed. She was 17 years old when Nena died, and she was 17 years and 3 months old when her father brought Adara home. Not as a girlfriend, not as a woman he was considering, as a wife, already introduced, already decided, the compound already rearranged. If you have never experienced the particular grief of becoming invisible in your own home, then it is difficult to explain what that does to a person. It is not dramatic the way it happens in films. No screaming arguments, no slamming doors, no villain twirling in obvious malice. It is much quieter than that, and much worse. Adara Obi, née Adara Chisom Eze, was 31 years old when she married Kelechi's father. Emeka was 53. She was younger than him by more than a decade, and she wore this gap not with embarrassment, but with a kind of cheerful entitlement, the way beautiful women sometimes do when they have learned early that their beauty is a form of currency. She was not unpleasant to Kelechi directly. That would have been too easy to name, too easy to fight against. What she did was subtler. She redecorated the sitting room without consulting anyone. She moved in Nena's photographs from the main corridor to a box in the store, explaining with a sweet smile that it was healthier for everyone to look forward. She cooked food Kelechi did not like and seemed genuinely surprised when Kelechi did not eat it. Adara called Kelechi my daughter in front of guests and looked wounded and confused when Kelechi did not respond warmly. And Emeka watched all of this and said nothing. That was the thing that broke Kelechi, not Adara. Adara was simply a woman who wanted what women want: security, position, a house she can call her own. Kelechi could almost understand that. What she could not understand, what she could not forgive, was her father's silence. The way he would look at her with something like discomfort when she was visibly unhappy, as though her grief was an inconvenience, a disruption to the new atmosphere he was trying to create. The last real conversation she had with her father before she left for university in Lagos was this: Kelechi, you are too serious. You have to learn to be flexible. Life moves on. She looked at him, this man who had taught her to ride a bicycle, who had clapped loudest at her primary school graduation, who had once stayed up all night when she had malaria, pressing cold towels to her forehead. And she thought, I don't know who you are anymore. She did not say this. She said nothing. She picked up her bag and walked out of the sitting room, and that was in every way that mattered, the beginning of her leaving. She left for Lagos 3 months later, and she did not look back. Not because she was strong, because she had learned from her mother that still water survives by moving quietly and conserving its depth for what truly matters. And if you are just joining this story right now, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because this is exactly the kind of story that will stay with you long after it ends. 7 years. In 7 years, Kelechi Obi built herself a life with the precision of a woman who has decided that no one else will build it for her. She finished her degree in estate management. She got a job at a real estate firm in Lekki. She rented a flat in Surulere that she painted herself on a Sunday, taking 3 full hours to choose the right shade of yellow because she had promised herself that every room she lived in would feel like a choice and not a default. She had friends, careful friendships, chosen slowly. She had a man she was beginning to love, a quiet architect named Tobino, who cooked terribly and knew it, and made up for it by being honest in a way that felt rare. She called her father on birthdays and Christmas. He called her sometimes when he wanted to know if she was well, which is different from actually wanting to know if she was well. The difference is in the follow-up questions, and Emeka never had follow-up questions. She did not call Adara. Adara sometimes sent text messages during public holidays. Kelechi responded with thank you emojis and nothing else. She had almost convinced herself that she was fine, that the distance was healing, that she had grieved her mother and grieved her father's abandonment and folded both griefs neatly and placed them in a part of herself she no longer visited. Then the envelope arrived, and the document inside it was a deed. Not a small deed, not a plot of land in some forgotten village corner. A deed to a commercial property in Onitsha, a building on a major road, a building that had been generating rental income for at least 15 years, a building registered entirely in Nena Obi's name, a building that Kelechi's mother had purchased quietly and maintained quietly and told absolutely no one about. Not her husband, not her relatives, no one. Except that in the accompanying legal letter, signed by a lawyer Kelechi had never heard of, a woman named Barrister Ngozi Amara, it was explained that Nena had updated her will 6 months before she died, at a time when she was ill but still lucid, and that she had bequeathed this property in its entirety to Kelechi and Kelechi alone. The letter also said something else. It said that Barrister Ngozi had waited for Kelechi to turn 25 before releasing this information, per the specific and unusual instructions of the deceased. That Kelechi was now 24 and 11 months old, that the time had nearly come, that there was one condition Kelechi needed to fulfill before the transfer could be completed. She needed to return to Onicha. She needed to go back to her father's house. Kelechi called Tobernard that evening. She did not tell him about the property. She told him about the envelope, about the photograph, about the handwriting on the back. He listened without interrupting,
which was one of the reasons she was beginning to love him. "Do you want to go?" he asked. "I don't know," she said, which was honest. "Are you afraid? Of what? Of what you'll find out when you get there." She was quiet for a long time. Outside her window, a generator somewhere in the street roared to life, and the neighbor's baby started crying, and Lagos continued its chaotic love affair with noise. "There's something wrong with this story," she said finally. "My mother was sick for 3 years. She had hospital bills. My father was always saying there was not enough money, and she owned a commercial building the entire time." Tobenna was quiet. "Why didn't she use it?" Kelechi asked. "Why didn't she touch it? Why did she hide it?" "Maybe," Tobenna said carefully, "she wasn't hiding it from the world. Maybe she was hiding it from someone specific." The sentence landed in Kelechi's chest like a stone dropped in deep water, slowly and then all at once. She booked a bus ticket to Onitsha that same night. The road to Onitsha is a road that never lets you forget where you come from. You leave Lagos and the city releases you reluctantly, slowly, the buildings thinning like hair on a sick man's scalp. And then suddenly you are in open land and the air is different and something in your body remembers itself. Kelechi sat in the bus and watched the landscape change and thought about her mother's hands, specifically the way her mother's hands looked when she was writing in that locked brown notebook. Focused, secret-keeping, alive in a way the rest of her sometimes wasn't. Her mother had been hiding something. The question that burned was not what. The deed answered what. The question was from whom. She arrived in Onicha in the late afternoon when the market was still roaring and the streets were packed with the particular energy of a trading city that never quite sleeps. She did not go to her father's house immediately. She went first to find Barrister Ngozi Amara. The office was small but ordered, tucked behind a pharmacy on a quiet street. Barrister Ngozi was a woman in her late 50s with natural grey locks and reading glasses perched at the end of her nose, and the serene confidence of a person who has carried other people's secrets for so long that she has made peace with the weight of them. "You look like her," the barrister said when Kelechi walked in. "People say that," Kelechi said. "I don't mean her face. I mean the way you hold yourself, like you are already preparing for bad news." Kelechi sat down. "Tell me everything." Barrister Ngozi folded her hands on the desk. "Your mother came to me 9 months before she died. She was very calm. She had clearly been thinking about this for a long time. She showed me the title documents for the property. She had purchased it 12 years before she came to see me. She had been collecting rental income through an account registered in her maiden name." 12 years, Kelechi said, before she was sick. Long before she was sick. So, she didn't hide it because she was dying. No, the barrister said. She hid it because she was afraid. The word sat between them. "Afraid of what?" Kelechi asked. Barrister Ngozi looked at her steadily. She was afraid that if your father knew about it, he would take it from her. Or rather, she was afraid that if certain people knew about it, it would disappear before it could reach you. "Certain people," Kelechi repeated. "You mean Adara?" The barrister's expression shifted barely, but Kelechi caught it. "Not only Adara," the barrister said. And then she told her the rest. Here is what Kelechi did not know. Here is what her mother knew and carried alone for over a decade.
Adara Chisom Eje, the woman who had moved into their home 3 months after Nena's death, with the comfortable ease of a woman returning to somewhere she had already mentally occupied, had not been a stranger to the Obi household. She had been there before. Not as a wife, not yet, but as a woman her father had been seeing long before Nena died, long before Nena was sick. The affair had begun approximately 14 years ago, during a period when Emeka's business was expanding and he was traveling frequently to Lagos and telling his wife that the trips were purely commercial. Nena had found out, not through drama, through the quiet, methodical intelligence of a woman who had always paid attention. A receipt here, a phone number there. The specific kind of distance in a husband's eyes when he is thinking of someone else. She had said nothing to Emeka. Instead, she had gone to a lawyer. Instead, she had taken money she had saved carefully over years, money from her own trading, from the small fabric business she ran that everyone treated as a hobby and no one treated as the serious enterprise it actually was, and she had bought property, quietly, in her maiden name, and she had locked it away for her daughter. Because she had known, even then, even 14 years ago, that the marriage would eventually become a transaction, and she wanted to make sure that when that happened, Kelechi would have something that could not be taken. Kelechi sat in Barrister Amara's small office and felt a grief so complex she could not find the shape of it. Her mother had known. For 14 years, her mother had known she was being betrayed and had said nothing, had smiled at family gatherings, had sat beside Emeka at church, had raised her daughter without bitterness, or at least without visible bitterness, and had quietly, silently, with extraordinary patience, built a fortress. She never confronted him, Kelechi asked. She said, Barrister Amara replied, that confrontation without power is just noise. She wanted to have something first. And the condition, the reason she wanted me to wait until 25. Barrister Amara slid a second document across the desk. She didn't want you to find out before you were old enough to know what to do with it, she said, and I am quoting her exactly here because I wrote it down. She said, Kelechi is like me. She will want to react immediately. Tell her to wait. Tell her that the right move at the wrong time is still the wrong move. Kelechi's eyes burned. She pressed her fingers against them. Her mother, even from the grave, was still the most strategic person she had ever known. She went to her father's house the next morning. The compound looked smaller than she remembered, which is what happens when you grow up and the places of your childhood shrink to their actual size. The mango tree was still there. Someone had painted the gate a different color. The deep red her mother had chosen was now a pale blue that reminded Kelechi of nothing in particular. Adara answered the door. For a moment, they stood looking at each other across 7 years and all the things that lived inside them. Adara had aged, but elegantly, the way women age when they have money and intention. She was dressed well, even at 8 a.m. Her lace blouse was tailored, her head wrap was elaborate. Kelechi, she said, and her voice was warm in the way that Kelechi had spent years learning to distrust. We didn't know you were coming. I know, Kelechi said. She walked in. Her father was in the sitting room, and when he saw her, his face went through several expressions quickly. Surprise, pleasure, and then underneath those, something else, something cautious. The look of a man who has done something he knows is wrong and has been waiting, without admitting he is waiting, for the reckoning. Kelechi, he said. He stood. He was older. He had the specific oldness of a man who has been comfortable for too long, softened, settled, the sharpness worn down by ease. Daddy, she said. She sat down without being invited to sit, an act so small, and yet she could see from the slight narrowing of his eyes, he noticed it. To what do we owe this visit? Adara asked from the doorway, her voice still warm, still performing. Kelechi looked at her father. Mama left something for me. I came to collect it. What happened in that sitting room over the next 2 hours was not a fight.
It was something more precise than a fight. It was a reckoning, the kind that has been a long time building and arrives not with an explosion, but with the terrible calm of water that has finally found its level. Kelechi placed the legal documents on the center table. She watched her father's face as he read them. She watched Adara standing behind him, reading over his shoulder, and she watched the exact moment Adara understood. Adara's face changed. The warmth evaporated. What was left underneath was harder, more angular, the real face of a woman who had been calculating for a long time and had just realized that one crucial variable had escaped her. Emeka set the papers down slowly. "I didn't know about this property." "I know," Kelechi said. "Your mother never told me. I know, Daddy. She didn't tell you on purpose." The silence in the room was enormous. "She had no right," Adara began. "She had every right," Kelechi said, and something in her voice made Adara stop. It was not a raised voice. It was the particular quiet of someone who has waited for this moment long enough to approach it without shaking. She had every right to do with her money what she chose. She earned it, she saved it, she protected it, and she left it to her child. Emeka looked at her. For a moment, just a moment, she saw something in his face that looked almost like recognition, like he was seeing his daughter for the first time in years and feeling the weight of all the time he had wasted not seeing her. "Kelechi," softly. She said, "I don't need you to explain. I already know everything, Daddy. I know about the affair. I know how long it went on. I know that Mama knew and said nothing."
The air in the room changed. Even Adara went still. "I'm not here to punish you," Kelechi continued. "I'm not here to make a scene. Mama didn't do it that way, and I am my mother's daughter. I came for what belongs to me. I will complete the legal process, and then I will leave." Her father's jaw worked silently. There was something crumbling in his face. Not guilt exactly, because guilt implies surprise, and I suspected he had known somewhere in himself that he deserved this. It was more like the particular grief of a man who has made a choice and lived comfortably with that choice for years and is now confronted with all the weight of what that choice cost. "Is that all you are to me now? A wrong to be corrected?" It was the most honest thing he had said to her in years, and it broke her heart and didn't stop her. "No," she said. "You are my father. You will always be my father. But you chose, Daddy. Not once. You chose every day for years. You chose to lie to Mama. You chose to bring Adara here before Mama was even cold in the ground. You chose your comfort over my grief. You made choices." She paused. "Mama made her choices too, and so have I." And if this story is moving you, make sure you subscribe to the channel and share it, because stories like this one deserve to be heard. She left the house after noon. She did not storm out. She walked out the way her mother had always moved, quietly, with intention, without drama. But she had not gone 3 steps from the gate when she heard running feet behind her, and she turned, and it was not her father. It was a young woman she had never seen before, early 20s, lean and nervous, wearing a house dress, coming from the back of the compound as though she had been listening from somewhere and could not hold herself back any longer. "You are Kelechi?" the young woman said. "Who are you?" The young woman swallowed. Her eyes were red-rimmed, the kind of red that comes from crying over a long period of time rather than from a single occasion. "My name is Amara," she said. "I am Adaora's younger sister. I have been living here for the past 2 years." She paused. Her hands were trembling. "There is something you need to know. Something about the property your mother left you." Kelechi looked at her carefully. "What about it?" The young woman glanced back at the compound with the terror of someone who is doing something they cannot undo. Then she looked at Kelechi and said, "Adaora knew about it.
She has known for almost 3 years. She has been trying to find a way to transfer it. She has a contact at the lands registry. They were waiting for the title documents to be released to you so that they could intercept them. Someone was supposed to collect the envelope before it reached you. Kelechi felt the ground shift under her feet. How did the envelope reach me then? She asked. Amara shook her head. I don't know who sent it. All I know is that when you called yesterday to say you are coming, Adara was afraid, more afraid than she should have been if she was innocent. Kelechi stood very still. Her mind was moving fast and cleanly, the way her mother's mind must have moved all those years ago when she sat at the kitchen table in the early morning, writing in her locked notebook. The right move at the wrong time is still the wrong move. She looked at Amara. Will you say this officially, to Barrister Amara, to anyone who needs to hear it? Amara's hands were still shaking, but her eyes steadied. That is why I ran after you. What followed was not quick. Nothing real is ever quick. There were lawyers, there were visits to the lands registry that revealed exactly as Amara had said, a series of suspicious queries on the property's file over the previous 2 years, queries that stopped just short of fraud, but that Barrister Amara described with a controlled fury as deeply irregular. There were statements given, there were meetings with a solicitor retained by Adara who made arguments that wilted under scrutiny. There was an afternoon when Kelechi sat in a government office for 4 hours waiting for a signature and used the time to call Tobeno and tell him finally the full story. He listened. He didn't interrupt. When she finished, he said, "Your mother was extraordinary." "I know," Kelechi said. "I didn't know how extraordinary until now." The property was transferred to her name, cleanly, legally, irreversibly, on a Thursday morning, 6 weeks after the envelope arrived. Barrister Amara shook her hand with both of hers and held it a moment longer than necessary, the way older women do when they want to pass something wordless between themselves. She would be proud, the barrister said. Kelechi nodded because she could not speak. But this is not a story about the property. That is the mistake easy stories make. They allow the object, the inheritance, the visible prize to become the point. The property was never the point. Nena Obi had not spent 12 years protecting a commercial building because she cared about real estate. She had spent 12 years protecting the thing the property represented, which was this, the right of her daughter to stand in the world without needing anyone to save her. The real inheritance was not in the deed. It was in what the deed revealed about how her mother had lived. Kelechi understood this on the drive back to Lagos, sitting again in a bus watching the landscape reverse itself, open land becoming crowded city, air growing heavy, the familiar complicated embrace of Lagos rising to meet her. She thought about her mother sitting alone at that kitchen table in the early morning, writing in her locked notebook, while her husband was elsewhere with a woman who would later move into her home. She thought about the particular courage that took, not the courage to confront or to leave, which are the kinds of courage stories celebrate, but the quieter, harder courage to endure strategically, to stay present, to plan, to refuse to collapse. She thought about herself at 17, watching her father sit comfortable and unbothered, while her grief made him uneasy, and she thought about how she had carried a version of that same unspoken strength out of that house with her, tucked inside her somewhere she hadn't fully named until now. She had thought she was running away. Her mother had known she was walking towards something. There is a thing that happens when you have been wronged for a long time and you finally receive some form of justice. People expect you to feel triumphant. People expect relief, celebration, the satisfying click of a story ending neatly. And there is some of that. There is some lightness. But there is also grief, because every form of justice is also a confirmation that the wrong thing really happened. The property transfer confirmed that her mother really had spent 14 years knowing her husband was betraying her. The documents confirmed that someone had really tried to steal from her before she could claim what was hers. The whole unfolding of it confirmed that the life she had thought she understood, the childhood, the family, the house with the mango tree and the red gate, had been running on secrets the whole time. You cannot receive justice and remain unchanged. The change is the price. Kelechi returned to her apartment in Surulere on a Friday evening and stood in her yellow kitchen and felt the full weight of the past 6 weeks settle into her bones. Tobena came over and brought food from a place she liked, and they sat on her floor because the table was too formal for what she was feeling. And she let herself cry in a way she had not cried since she was 17. Not for the property, not even for herself, for her mother. For the version of her mother she had never fully known, the woman behind the stillness, the woman who had sat with impossible knowledge and chosen her child's future over her own present comfort. The woman who wrote things in a locked notebook that Kelechi would now never read. The woman who looked at a young daughter of 17 and calculated, with love as the driving logic, what that daughter would need from a world that had already proved it could be unkind. Kelechi said into her Tobena's shoulder, "I never asked her enough questions." He said, "You were a child. Children aren't supposed to ask those questions. That's the point. I should have gone back sooner. Maybe, or maybe you went back at exactly the right time. Maybe she knew you needed 7 years to become someone who could handle what was waiting." She thought about this. She thought about the instruction, wait until 25. Wait until you are old enough to know what to do with it. Her mother had been right. At 22, she would have walked into that sitting room and exploded. At 23, she would have been too raw. At 24 years and 5 months, she walked in with her papers and her mother's particular stillness, and she had said what needed to be said and collected what needed to be collected and left without destroying everything that did not need to be destroyed. She had become, without knowing it, exactly what her mother had been building. Her father called her 3 weeks later. She almost didn't answer. Then she answered because she was her mother's daughter, and her mother had never, even in her darkest knowledge, closed every door. He sounded old on the phone. Not older, old. The specific oldness that arrives not from years, but from facing things you've been avoiding. "I want to tell you something," he said. She waited. He said, "I knew. Not about the property. I genuinely did not know about that. But I knew things were not right. I knew what I was doing when I brought Adara here. I told myself you were strong, that you would be fine, that young people are resilient." A pause. "I told myself whatever I needed to tell myself." Kelechi looked at her yellow wall. "I know, Daddy," she said. "I am sorry," he said. The words were simple. They were not enough. They were not nothing. "I hear you," she said. "Will you come home again one day?" She thought about the mango tree. She thought about the gate that was now pale blue instead of red. She thought about a man who was capable of love and also capable of profound, prolonged selfishness, and who was not a villain and was not a hero, but was her father. "One day," she said. "Not soon, but one day." She meant it. That was the most she could give him, and she gave it honestly. The commercial property in Onitsha now generates income. Kelechi has engaged a property manager, the recommended one from Barrister Amara's network, a woman who communicates clearly and answers phone calls. The first payment arrived in her account on a Monday morning, and she sat looking at it for a long time. She sent a portion of it to Amara, Adara's sister, the young woman who had run after her, not as payment for testimony, as a beginning, as a recognition of the particular cost of being the one in the family who tells the truth. Amara was no longer in the Obi compound. She had left the same week Kelechi left. The direction her life would take from there was uncertain, but Kelechi had given her Barrister Amara's number and a job lead and a brief but sincere text that said, "You were brave. That matters." Adara herself remained. This was the part of the story that those who like clean endings would find unsatisfying. Adara remained in the house with Emeka. The attempt to intercept the property was not criminal enough finally to warrant prosecution. It was irregular, it was suspicious, but Kelechi did not have the appetite for a legal war that would cost years, and she suspected pragmatically that her mother would have agreed. The goal was not to destroy Adara. The goal was to ensure Adara did not destroy what was Kelechi's. That goal had been achieved. The rest was life, continuing its messy and unresolved work.
Kelechi found her mother's brown notebook. This was the part she had not expected. 3 months after the property transfer, her auntie Chioma, her mother's younger sister, a woman Kelechi had seen only at funerals and Christmas over the past 7 years, appeared at her door in Lagos with a bag and an expression of someone who has been waiting a long time to do something. "She gave this to me before she died," Auntie Chioma said, holding out the notebook. "She said to give it to you when you had claimed what was yours. I didn't know what she meant until I started hearing what happened in Onitsha." Kelechi held the notebook in her hands. The lock was a small brass one. There was a key taped to the back. She opened it that night alone, after Tobena had gone home, after the city outside had settled into its partial and restless quiet. The notebook was full, almost every page covered in her mother's careful handwriting, a documentation that stretched across 12 years of small observations, plans, fears, and love. Most of it was practical: records of the property, financial notes, legal reminders to herself, the name of Barrister Amara with a small star beside it, and the words, "This one I trust." But scattered through the practical entries were other things: reflections, memories. On one page, a long entry about watching Kelechi sleep when she was small, written with a tenderness so concentrated that Kelechi had to stop and read and breathe. On the last written page, an entry dated 6 months before Nena died, 3 months before she visited Barrister Amara. "I am not afraid of dying. I have made the arrangements. Kelechi will be taken care of. What I am afraid of is that she will think I was weak, that she will look at my life and see a woman who allowed too much. I want her to know I knew, I always knew. I chose my battles carefully because I knew my strength was limited and I needed to spend it on what mattered. She mattered. Everything else was noise. Tell her I chose her every single day. Tell her that is what love actually looks like." This is how the story ends. Not with a victory parade, not with a court ruling, not with a confrontation that fixes everything. With a notebook and a key, and a woman reading her mother's handwriting by a lamp in a Lagos apartment, understanding for the first time the full dimensions of the person who made her. Kelechi Obi is 25 now. She owns property, she has her mother's stillness and her mother's patience, and increasingly her mother's understanding that the right move at the wrong time is still the wrong move. She is not healed. Healing is not a destination, it is a practice, and she practices it imperfectly. There are days when she is angry at her father in ways she cannot fully express. There are days when she misses her mother with a force that feels physical. There are days when the weight of having been unseen for so long presses down on her, and she has to sit very still
and remind herself that being unseen was never the truth of her. It was only what someone else's negligence allowed to happen temporarily. She talks to Tobena about most of it, not all of it. Some grief is not meant to be shared. Some of it is meant to be carried quietly and transformed slowly into something that does not destroy you. She learnt this from her mother. Her father is old and sorry and still not fully honest about everything he did. He is her father. This is the complexity that does not resolve. Adara is in that compound and will likely stay there, and the mango tree is still growing, and the gate is still the wrong color, and the world continues to contain people who choose badly and people who pay the price for other people's bad choices. But Nena Obi's daughter is standing. Still water runs deepest. And some inheritances cannot be stolen because they were never kept in any place that a thief could find. They were kept in the making of a daughter, layered in quietly over 17 years of careful, deliberate, magnificent love. You cannot intercept what was written into a person. You cannot register a claim on what a mother places in a child's bones. Thank you for staying with this story until the end. If this moved you, if it reminded you of someone you love, or someone you have lost, or something you have waited a long time to claim, share it, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. These stories exist because you listen to them. And remember, the right move at the wrong time is still the wrong move. Wait, plan, protect what is yours, then collect it.